Harvard Divinity School.
Uses and abuses of power in alternative spiritualities. Implications for spiritual care of patients and communities. April 29th, 2023.
Great. So thank you, Natalia, for that presentation. Thank you, everyone in the Divinity School. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Okay, like Natalia said, my presentation, it's about empowerment and agency among Llave Mariana's practitioners. So what I'll be sharing with you today is some of my doctoral research results, and these are related to this emergent spiritual movement that's called Llave Mariana. I carried this study with the intention of understanding why women approach this movement and what ideas of femininity were elaborated by them. I was also guided by the question, what transformations do these practitioners experience at an intimate and relational level during this path? I have chosen in this case to leave most of the academic discussion aside and prioritize the ethnographic narrative that I consider less known and more interesting for this occasion. I'd be more than happy to share with you more precise conceptual definitions later. In this research, I applied a combined methodology approach, complementing virtual ethnography techniques with traditional fieldwork resources, mainly participant observation and semi-instructor interviews. Most of the fieldwork was conducted in initiations where the participants are taught the core doctrinal aspects of the movement and some healing techniques, with also particular meditation routines. So for this presentation, I've centered on a group of women who in some cases experience underprivileged circumstances. This group is located in La Matanza district in a working class neighborhood in Greater Buenos Aires. Before going further into ethnographic details, let me give some very general information about Argentina's socio-religious field. Even though Argentina maintains an interesting and increasing religious diversity, it's mostly a Catholic nation. The state financially sustains this cult, and Virgin Mary's devotion is a fundamental piece of our symbolic landscape. In this context, during the 1980s, lots of New Age practices and ideas started arriving in the country, becoming more relevant within the years. Practices like yoga, Reiki, and different kinds of meditation grew among middle and upper classes. Since the start of the millennium, these knowledge and practices, once very exclusive, became more and more visible and present among less educated and working class people, at first through mass media and more recently through social media. Born at the beginning of the 21st century, the Llave Mariana, it's a spiritual movement that started in Buenos Aires and in the last 2 decades has spread all over the country. The origin of this belief is found in a series of revelations received by a Reiki master whose name is Veronica, but who is no longer part of the organization that was initiated around her in this first stage. Nowadays, Llave Mariana has thousands of members who gather to perform rituals and develop much of their daily interaction online. They are represented by a symbol with the shape of a key that was also revealed by Virgin Mary. The symbol gave the movement its name and is often evoked during its rituals. It's a symbol you can see in the screen. So I think this spiritual group can be considered a part of Argentina's alternative spiritualities and has the peculiarity of mixing typically New Age elements taken from Orientalist traditions, such as language linked to chakras and energy, with Catholic figures, especially Virgin Mary. However, the group develops explicitly outside any institutional or territorial Catholic structure. Its rituals are supposed to work imposing hands or sending energy from a distance, emulating the way that Reiki works. Usually, recipients have asked to be helped with these energy treatments due to medical issues or several types of problems. Now that I've already gone through Llave Mariana's history, I'd like to analyze more deeply its practitioners' characteristics, biographies, and testimonies. Oh, perfect. Due to the Catholic threats that I've already mentioned, its followers are mostly former Catholics who, for various reasons, have distanced themselves from or criticized much of the institutional aspects of the Catholic Church. It needs to be said that more than 90% of Llave Mariana's followers are women. This is also the case of most spiritual movements in Latin America. We can relate this to the gender inequality situation women suffer and their need to look for spiritual tools to cope with the distress that arises. To develop the core argument of my presentation, I'll make 3 key points sustained in testimonies gathered during my interviews. I'll include some to give a hint about the way these women experience their own trajectories and spiritual lives. So, perfect. Let's get to the first point. What are these women's previous conditions? Why do they have the need to look for spiritual answers? Taking their own words into account, we can say that many Llave Mariana's members had experienced various traumatic events and inequalities due to structural gender conditions. Let's take Mirta's testimony to illustrate this. Mirta is a Llave Mariana's instructor and has been leading initiations for more than a decade. She's in her 60s and worked most of her life as a secretary. When she was in her middle 20s, she was victim of a sexual harassment episode that ended very quickly. In her own words, the resolution of this episode was a miracle that she would thank to Mother Mary during her entire life. This was one of the turning points that brought her closer to spirituality. During her youth, Mirta had a really intense religious curiosity that was interrupted by her marriage. Her husband was traditional Catholic and had very conservative ideas about the proper way to live one's faith. This was a reason for tension and conflict between the two of them. Thereby, Mirta's personal and spiritual search was left behind for several years. She told me during our interview, "I didn't leave my house to do any practice, but deep down inside, I still felt what I've always been, a spiritual person." This shows that she properly fulfilled what she thought to be her duties as a wife while resigning an important part of herself. After her husband's death, she restarted her spiritual exploration and, among other disciplines, started getting in touch with Llave Mariana's practices and wisdom, later becoming an instructor. Currently, Mirta dedicates most of her time to her guiding labors in Llave Mariana's groups and feels extremely pleased with this activity. It's easy to recognize different kinds of oppression that Mirta suffered during her life due to gender matters. Spirituality was for her a way of dealing with pain and turned out to be a very useful tool to find herself. So, I'll introduce Sarah's story now. We can think about Sarah's journey in a similar way. Sarah is in her 40s and works at a public school's cafeteria in an underprivileged neighborhood. When I met her, she was going through a violent separation. She and her children were suffering psychological abuse, constantly receiving insults and mistreatment from her ex-husband. Given this context, she approached her nearest yoga center looking for activities that would help her to heal. There, she started some Reiki lessons and quickly got in touch with Llave Mariana. At the moment, Sarah uses Llave Mariana's meditations to calm herself down. She also applies its energy treatments for self-protection and to protect her children who were emotionally traumatized by the situation. In order to do this, and like many other women, she puts the symbol's image into her children's notebooks and personal effects. As we can see, Sarah's motives are tightly linked to her gender condition. The violence she was frequently dealing with put her self-esteem in check. Therefore, she desperately approached spirituality in the hope of regaining well-being. The next point I'd like to make is about what kind of female representations were floating around the group, what topics and values are attached to womanhood according to Llave Mariana's members. The most relevant element to understand this kind of representation is without doubt, Mary's figure. She triggers meanings, values, and emotions strongly related to motherhood and care. I think we can find some marks of these ideas and values in Silvia's narrative. Silvia is a Llave Mariana practitioner very committed to her community. She was born in La Matanza, where she still lives in a working class family. With great effort, she was able to study to become a physician. She's a former Catholic, but currently has very critical opinions on the Catholic Church as an institution. In spite of this, she keeps a strong faith in Virgin Mary and feels very attached to her. Also, she perceives herself as a part of a lineage of healing women, and she is a mother of two. She told me, nowadays, women try to find a balance between being inside and being outside, because when you go too far away from your home, you miss it. It happened to me. I had to pause my professional life because I spent more time outside than inside my home. On the one hand, we can see Silvia experience a tension between her professional development and her duties as a mother and wife. Furthermore, we can notice how she solves the distress caused by this tension, leaning towards spiritual tools. On the other hand, the relevance that her responsibilities as a caregiver has can help us understand her strong devotion to Virgin Mary and the immediate interest that the Llave Mariana arose in her. As we point out in Sarah's case, Llave Mariana's treatments also function to reinforce these women's caretaking roles, thereby emphasizing traditional feminine stereotypes that are completely accepted and celebrated by its practitioners, inspired by a Marian role model. We go to the third and last point that I'd like to approach today: the subjective and relational transformations pushed by spiritual practice in Llave Mariana's members. I think Marta's trajectory is a case in point. Marta also lives in La Matanza and is Silvia's friend. She's a hairstylist and the owner of a small beauty salon. Her salon is often used as a spiritual center where lots of neighbors interested in this kind of practice gather. Regardless of her father's opposition, Marta became a tarotist and a numerologist, and is also a curious student of many disciplines like astrology or biodecoding. During our interview, she explained, "Psychic told me that my mission is to do justice for the female lineage. I realized that in my family, there were many women kept quiet about the beatings, the abuse. They kept quiet about everything. And I realized that I hadn't come to this world to put up with mistreatment, that I wanted to raise my voice to say whatever that I didn't like." One of the relevant effects in Marta's trajectory is the new bonds and relationships that she constructed with other women. From the moment she started her spiritual path, she began to be recognized for this by the women around her, her customers, neighbors, and friends. This changed the way they related to each other, building a stronger connection. Currently, Marta has a leadership position in the spiritual group that has grown around her working space. This female community shares lots of their time, investing their effort and in some cases economic resources for activities that work for its own benefit. This kind of agency implies an important transformation for women like Marta, who are used to dedicating most of their time caring for others. In this empowering path, there's also an inner subjective dimension that has to do with a deep introspective work carried out mainly through meditation. In these rituals, practitioners connect with Mother Mary's energy and experience relevant differences in the way they feel afterwards, mentioning joy and gratitude. I would like to say a few more words to conclude. I understand that the participation and adoption of spiritual practice can help women to elaborate situations of conflict, grief, or self-discomfort, the kind of situation that require greater personal and introspective work and had led them to approach the spiritual world in the first place. Being a member of the Llave Mariana movement has, in my opinion, a double effect over these women. On the one hand, it reinforces a Marian and maternal role model attached to the traditional distribution of roles and tasks. The responsibility to care for others is always a feminine issue, and maternity seems to be nearly the only and most significant destiny in women's lives. In spite of this, taking into account the concrete effects of this membership, women in Llave Mariana gain autonomy and self-esteem. They also start building a peer network to rely on and feel more confident to perform various activities they once considered to be impossible, such as driving a car, running their own businesses, or even spending their Sundays away from their homes. All the previous allows us to recognize these practitioners' agency and their resistance to a hierarchical and unequal system. As we can see, the transformation of feminine roles can make their way into these kind of scenarios, such as religious or spiritual movements, empowering women through new ways of being and acting in the world. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, President and Fellows of Harvard College.